your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for our Week in Review. Alberta's new energy minister says he has no plans for now to rescind an order protecting the Rocky Mountains from coal development. Peter Guthrie made the comment at an Edmonton news conference on funding for a hydrogen project. Guthrie also confirmed his department is studying an oil industry proposal that would use royalty breaks on new production to encourage the cleanup of old wells. That proposal has been widely criticized by energy economists and was rebuffed under his predecessor as countering the idea that polluters should pay to clean up their own mess. Alberta's opposition says Premier Danielle Smith shouldn't be looking for advice from a doctor that they say is a discredited conspiracy theorist who has labeled the COVID-19 vaccine as a biological weapon. Smith told a candidates debate for the by-election in Brooks Medicine Hat that she was interested in hearing what Dr. Paul Alexander has to say. The NDP health critic David Shepherd is calling on her to rescind that invitation. They're also calling on Smith to reveal the names of the medical team that she said is providing her public health advice. A special dignitary from Lethbridge received a top honor recently. Lethbridge County Reeve Tori Campbell took home the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal on Monday at the Royal Municipalities of Alberta Convention in Edmonton. The award is given to citizens of the United Kingdom and its Commonwealth countries who have made a significant impact in their communities and who have contributed to the betterment of their municipalities. Campbell says it was quite humbling to receive the award.
Very fortunate, very thankful for that honor, but also acknowledge that, there were 7,000 of them that went out in Alberta to deserving Albertans that have contributed to society and helped to make Alberta a better place. So very fortunate to be included in that list, very thankful, but also acknowledge all the great work of so many Albertans that were recognized. And obviously, you can't recognize everyone at the same time too, but a big honor and very thankful.
Campbell began his second term as Reeve for Lethbridge County and has been a member of council since 2017. A healthy donation has been made its way to our two food banks here in Lethbridge. A total of over $10,000 was raised and given to officials at the Lethbridge and Interfaith food banks by staff from the Lethbridge Curling Club. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains, representatives from the Lethbridge Food Bank say this money will go directly to helping families who have the greatest need in our city.
Last month alone, we saw over 90 families that were accessing the hamper program more than last year.
The Lethbridge Food Bank has seen a large increase in clients over the last few months, and Mac Nickel, the executive director of the nonprofit, says this donation is much needed, especially with inflation and the cost of living continuing to rise.
One way I like to really point it out is we really started to see food inflation prices happen around March was when we really started to see it, and directly we saw clients come in more.
The money will go directly toward funding Christmas hampers at the Lethbridge Food Bank.
We include things like stuffing and large dinner meal planning, turkeys, bigger meat planning, to make sure that the families that are accessing the program during Christmas time have exactly what they need for their families.
The donation for the two food banks comes from the 50-50 raffle that the Lethbridge Curling Club provided during the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. The general manager of the Lethbridge Curling Club, Kirk Mearns, says raising money for the community is one of the most important things the organization does.
We want to make sure that when we raise money that everybody wins, that we help give everybody a helping hand where we can and when we can. We work it in our Special Olympics, we work it with our junior curling programs, with our high school programs. We really want to make sure that we're giving back to the community as much as we can.
Staff from the Lethbridge Curling Club also cited the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier, which generated over $16.8 million in economic activity for the Lethbridge region, as a huge factor for the continued popularity of curling in our city.
Here in Lethbridge, our only shelter has been full and over capacity this past week due to the extreme cold weather. Staff from Alpha House Society say they don't turn away any homeless that are in need. They are also currently in talks to have the Blood Tribe Department of Health take over the operations of their shelter.
That is still the plan for the service provision grant to be transferred to the Blood Tribe Department of Health. That would be transitioning in January, so still a little bit of time until then. And discussions are ongoing about the best way to make that transition as seamless as possible.
Staff from Alpha House say that you can donate winter jackets, boots, and sweatpants at the shelter for our city's most vulnerable to use during the cold winter months. Staff says personnel hygiene items are also currently needed. Coming up, Danielle Smith returns to the legislature after winning a seat in Brooks Medicine Hat. We'll have more after the break. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith has won a seat in the legislature by defeating 4 opponents in the Brooks Medicine Hat by-election. The unofficial results show Smith winning 54% of the votes, while NDP candidate Gwendolyn Dirk walked away with 26.5%, or less than half the number of votes that Smith received. Coming in third place was former Brooks Mayor Barry Morishita, who received 16.5%, less than a third of the number of votes. Smith called the by-election shortly after she won the race to replace Jason Kenney as United Conservative Party leader and premier on October the 6th.
We are going to deliver more and better jobs, accessible health care, and a lower cost of living for you and your family. That is the choice. That is the only choice. Well, the others only want to talk about the past with their gotcha politics. The UCP is always going to listen to you, the voters. And when it comes to your cost of living, let me just talk about a couple of things that are coming up. How much you pay for life's necessities. You need to decide who will actually fight for you. Because the NDP Liberal Coalition sure does love their carbon tax, don't they? The carbon tax is designed by the wealthy and well-connected. They are not impacted by it. It's to make life more painful for the poor and the powerless. And with that tax set to go up yet again in the middle of winter at a time when inflation is eating into more and more of your hard-earned dollars, I am listening and I'm going to be there for you every single day.
For the first time in 7 years, Smith will take her seat in the legislature on November 29th. We'll have more on this by-election coming up later on in the show. Alberta's Court of Appeal has upheld the requirement that transplant recipients be vaccinated against COVID-19. It's agreed with a lower court that dismissed a legal challenge filed by a woman against Alberta Health Services, a hospital, and doctors after she was unable to get life-saving organ transplant due to her unwillingness to get vaccinated. Annette Lewis argued the requirement violated her right to life, but the province's highest court says it's a necessary component of proper medical care for people seeking an organ transplant. Lewis's lawyer says that they're reviewing the decision and will consider an appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. A former NDP member of the Alberta legislature has pleaded guilty to a charge under the Health Information Act after a computer hacking investigation. Thomas Dang entered the plea in provincial court November 4th and is to be sentenced on November 29th. Dang, who represents Edmonton South and now sits as an independent member, left the NDP caucus almost a year ago when the RCMP began investigating a hack of Alberta's COVID-19 vaccine website. Dang later admitted to using his computer to follow up on a tip about possible loopholes on the website that allowed access to people's private health information. This week, Jim Willett, who is the mayor of Coutts, Alberta, took the stand in Ottawa at the Emergencies Measure Act hearings. Willett says although he warned the provincial government of a potential protest and blockade happening at the border crossing just outside his town last winter, police appeared to be caught off guard by it. Willett says he warned of a potential blockade in an email to then Premier Jason Kenney on January 27th and was told the Mounties had been alerted. He says a large convoy of trucks gathered at the border 2 days later, and the RCMP didn't establish a large police presence until 3 days after that. Meanwhile, Fort Macleod Town Councillor Marco Van Hugenbos, who was charged with mischief at the Coutts border blockade, also took the stand in Ottawa this week. Van Hugenbos says that he believes implementation of the Emergencies Measure Act was unnecessary.
More and more I've come to the conclusion that it was not necessary and that the EMA was a political tool. It was never, there was nothing that was used that the EMA had the ability to use to resolve Coutts. Yesterday, my testimony yesterday spoke to our decision making in regards to leaving Coots, and the EMA and the powers and all of the abilities given to law enforcement under the EMA never became relevant for us. That was never considered for us in leaving Coots.
The commission heard today from the Coots mayor as well. So were you able to take that in as well, Marco?
He had very little direct involvement in the blockade. Some of the individuals he was communicating with doing so. There was a lot of personal bias in there, and I can understand the frustrations he might have had and the views he might have had, and that's allowed. But he didn't testify a lot to actual factual things that were relevant to the blockade and the commission and how the EMA may have been justified or not justified.
The hearings will wrap up November 25th. After the break, reaction to the Brooks Medicine Hat election and how the U.S. midterms may impact Canadians. Keep it right here. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is heading back to the legislature after being absent from it for 7 years. Smith won the by-election in Brooks Medicine Hat on Tuesday night, taking home around 54% of the vote. But that wasn't the only election affecting Alberta this week, as the U.S. had its midterms to add to the mix. To talk more about the effects and impacts that these races will have on Alberta and those Albertans abroad, our Alberta snowbird Val Olsen joins us from her home away from home in Arizona. So Val, what is your reaction to Danielle Smith's win?
I'm not surprised. We want to see Danielle Smith succeed. And a lot of people say you can run a dog as long as it's conservative and it's going to win. The point is, Medicine Hat, Brooks, Southern Alberta is conservative country, and everyone is going to rally behind the premier of the province.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned before that Danielle Smith has a bit of a following in the U.S., particularly among women.
Well, definitely she does. I was surprised, Jeanette, that some of our social influencers here in the U.S. were calling Danielle Smith out. Now, she has kind of been starting her days with making a lot of public apologies for things that she said in the past. Now, that is a tactic that we see of opponents, and unfortunately, it's had an impact. It's having, outspoken Americans looking at Alberta and going, why is this woman apologizing? Why is she doing these things? So there are some social influencers, mama bears, who are not impressed that she has backtracked on things that she said. So there's definitely an added layer of flavor and what I would call security for mama bears here who are very, pro-parental rights, pro-freedom. They are watching Alberta and Danielle Smith. And that video in particular was trending that I'm talking about, where they were saying to Danielle Smith, you cannot backtrack on things like this. The COVID rules impacted families in such a negative way. And you can't just say, I'm sorry, the government's sorry, and throw money or offer jobs back. You need to have a plan of action and you need to follow it.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the U.S. midterm election. So what was it like where you are in Arizona?
In this county in particular, there's a lot of excitement across the state of Arizona. Maricopa is being talked about because there's some issues that does fall under the election integrity, which is top of mind. You can't go anywhere in Arizona without that being part of the discussion, and creating a system or having a system in play where you can trust the vote.
So, Val, how do you think that Alberta will fare with the outcome of these U.S. elections? Will this affect Canadians or Albertans specifically in any way?
I think that we have to wait and see what the official results are going to be. If if we do see more Republicans then get power, then you're going to see less of these freedom-sucking things being able to be passed. Okay. So it's all going to depend on what the outcome is. So obviously, as someone who values individual rights and freedoms, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to see a Republican sweep. The media called it look for a red wave. That was the narrative. And today there is a letdown because it's not. It was never ever going to be a red wave. It all comes down to collecting X amounts of seats, and that outcome is still in question.
Val, what about the idea that Alberta is sort of the Texas of Canada? Is there going to be any influence there regarding these elections?
The culture here in the United States is much, much different than in Alberta or other parts of Canada. And I've lived in different parts of Canada, and I know that Alberta is the most like comparable to Texas, where you value your right to bear arms. You have no problem stopping and praying for people on demand. And then there's other parts of very, very liberal or socialist Canada where you wouldn't dream of doing that. But at the same time, look at Alberta, right? We had Jason Kenney, a conservative in name only premier, putting pastors in jail. The joke around here is in communist Canada. That's what Canada's called, in communist Canada.
Stay with us. We have more after the break. The Fraser Institute recently published the results of their study comparing government and private sector wages here in Alberta. BCN's Michael Clausen spoke with Ben Eisen, Senior Fellow of the Fraser Institute, to dig deeper into their report.
Why did you feel it was important to study and compare government and private sector compensation in Alberta?
Well, this is something that we've been doing across the country for some time. And the reason that we think it's so important to study is that this is a major area of expenditure for governments all across the country, including in Alberta. It's about half of all provincial government spending. It's a significant chunk of local spending. So it's really one of the most important areas of public management to make sure that you're using resources appropriately. And so it's important to make sure that while we are paying enough to attract high quality talent, the kind of people we need to deliver high quality public services, that we're competitive with the private sector, that we're not paying a premium beyond what's necessary to achieve that, and thereby creating a compensation gap between government officials and the private sector taxpayers who help fund their salaries. So that's why we think this is important. It's about the stewardship of public money. It's about cost effectiveness and getting good public services for the lowest amount for taxpayers. And that means compensating public servants fairly and in line with the private sector, but not in excess of that.
Can you talk about the process that your group went through to gather this vast amount of information?
That's a wonderful question. So what we do is we start with the sort of raw numbers. We say, okay, what's the average amount of money earned by people working in the government sector? What's the average amount earned by people working in the private sector? And there the gap is quite a bit bigger than the 5% we talked about. And but there's lots of reasons for that. Tends to be a higher average level of education. People have been working longer. It tends to be an older workforce. So there's nothing unreasonable about a raw average like that, but you can't stop your research there. What you then do is you take a bunch of things that we know drive compensation. You take a look at how long people have been in the workforce. You take a look at their amount of education, experience, occupation, industry, things of all those natures. And then you put them into what we won't get too deep into the statistics, but something called a regression analysis. And that's the way econometricians and economists try to measure things that are difficult to measure, is you try and make things like to like by adjusting for all these things that we know help drive it. So that's the process that we use to try and compare similarly educated, similarly experienced people in similar industries to try and get it as close as we can to get a fit. And then we produce the best possible estimate we can of how large the premium is.
Wow, it sounds very in-depth. And even from reading the bullet points on the infographic that the Fraser Institute put out, that 5.6% maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but can you maybe describe or give us an idea of what the size of that difference would be over a 30-year career?
Oh, I mean, it would be tremendous, especially because it compounds, and then and it moves over time, and then you that has an effect on savings and things of that nature. If you earn additional money, you can save more, and then that compounds over time. So the amount it can make, the difference that it can make to your lifelong earnings and savings and retirement is significant, especially when you factor in just how different the pension compensation is, just how many public sector workers have government have excuse me employer sponsored pensions, and then how many of them are defined benefit, which means it's known in advance essentially how much they get, rather than it simply being based on how much they put in and then how the market happens to perform. So you put those things all together, yeah, it's a substantially greater. 5% plus premium is meaningful. Who wouldn't like a 5% raise? But it's only a small piece of the puzzle.
As I was doing research for this interview, the number of sick days that you talked about, that's surprising.
Yeah, no, it's a striking difference. The number of days taken off for personal reasons, about 14.4 days on average for people in the government sector. That includes sick days, other things, versus 8.9 for, so 14.4 versus 8.9. That is not a meaningless difference. That's a decent chunk of your year additional that people are working, and that nonetheless still making a meaningfully less money, not having as likely to have a pension contribution, and things of that nature. So it really is, as you say, one more piece of the puzzle that helps us understand that we really are paying a premium for labor in the government sector in Alberta.
In your mind, what would you hope to see accomplished from this study?
I would hope that Albertans can would recognize that despite the fact that right now there's a resource windfall and the government's in surplus, that the long-term fiscal prospects for Alberta are very difficult. Without all this resource revenue, Alberta has a lot of trouble. And so if it dries up anytime soon or later, the province needs to be ready and needs to better align its spending with the amount it's taking in taxes. And it's taking in quite a lot of money in taxes. And right now, that is not happening. There is too much being spent relative to the amount that's collecting through the tax base. So we need to be looking for ways to deliver public services more cost effectively, and how we're compensating public servants and the rest of the government sector should be an important part of that conversation.
When we return, a closer look at the Remembrance Day poppy. Stay with us. This Remembrance Day long weekend is a time to reflect on the many sacrifices paid by our soldiers to allow us to enjoy the freedoms we have today. Earlier this week, Hal Roberts joined Jeff Alden, manager of the Lethbridge Royal Canadian Legion, to talk about military service and the importance of the poppy.
Why did you first decide to enlist in the armed forces, and you were in the Army, correct? What really inspired you to join?
Initially, I signed up because I wanted to join and be, at that time, called a SARTEC, so it was like basically a medic that could go anywhere. But I couldn't go directly into it, so I had to join the artillery.
Now, officials with the Canadian Armed Forces, Jeff, say there's a real shortage of personnel right now. They're having a hard time getting recruits. Why do you think that is?
It's very evident to me and most of my compatriots. No equipment, no ammunition, no money to train, and no money to use your skills. They just want bodies on the ground. When you look at the last, let's say the last few operations we've done, historically, we're doing things like in Germany, in defense of the line, from the Eastern Front, that sort of thing, with a NATO, and we do UN tours and things like that. Most of our soldiers today are going off to do, what was the last thing? Clean up after a hurricane. We do a lot of civil power service now, and that's not really what I think a lot of our young men and women want to do. I know my main reason, we all say it's to serve our country, but ultimately we all got in because we wanted the excitement of travel and adventure and a challenge to our lifestyle. This new policy that the Canadian Forces has adopted with, I'm not a racist or bigot or anything like that, but you simply cannot allow the common soldier to do what they want, look how they want, dress how they want, and expect them to have the discipline to go into battle and follow orders. It just won't happen. Their whole lifestyle is based on doing what they want. How can you be a soldier in a company of infantry and be expected to do as you're told when your whole lifestyle and the whole new change is to, I can do what I want. So I'll do what I want, when I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why a lot of guys that want the adventure and the training won't join. The other aspect of it is, probably getting up to about 40% of our country are people that have come from war-torn countries. Our citizenship in Canada now are immigrants that are running from war. Why would they join a military and fight for another country? They've been through it. They lived through it as children. I think that joining the military is not a good option for kids today. Go to school, get a trade, and start a business to help us in our own local efforts.
Jeff, war is never pleasant, but some people believe it's really necessary at times. Can you talk about the importance of fighting for freedom?
Well, if we didn't fight, in our veterans in the First and Second World War and Korea War didn't fight for freedoms, we wouldn't be able to have the job you want. You wouldn't be able to have the homes and the family and lifestyle that you want. You would have been told how to live, what your job was going to be. I mean, you don't have to look very far. I mean, look at what Russia's going through and look at what the Chinese people are going through.
So, Jeff, let's talk about the poppy right now. The significance, the importance of the poppy. Why should we wear one?
Well, this is one thing right now that we're going through, because we're right now in the poppy drive for Legions. We wear the poppy to show that we remember the veterans' service and sacrifice. It's not to support military. It's not to support war. And this is where a lot of the new concepts people get. We get a lot of people come up to us and say, we ask them very politely, say, notice you're not wearing a poppy. Would you like a poppy? And you're not buying a poppy. You get poppies for free. They're given. Your donation is appreciated, but not necessary. Okay. But people will say, no, I don't want a poppy. I'm not in support of the military. I don't support the military, and I don't support war anywhere in the world. So the reason for a poppy isn't that. The reason for a poppy is to recognize the past sacrifices. The reason why our veterans gave their lives was so that we wouldn't have wars and wouldn't need a military in the future. As sad as that is, it's still ongoing, and it's still a reality as we're looking at Ukraine and Russia right now.
So do you think the numbers are decreasing then, the amount of people wearing a poppy?
Yes, we've seen that historically. The amount of poppies we're getting, we're seeing people wear is diminishing. Remembrance is fading. Again, I go back to a majority, or 40% of our population has come from countries that don't even know what the poppy is.
After the break, we hear about the importance volunteers play in our community. Stay with us.